Hello, my name is Rob Garner. I'm a computer programming instructor, and today I'm going to demonstrate how to create a drop-down list in WebForms. So I've already got a database demo application. Actually, and if we look, we already have a personnel database. It's got department and employee tables in it already. And so what I'm going to do is add a web form, and I'm going to call it data adapter or demo. And so on this form, we're going to put in a drop-down list. Now with the drop-down list, we could add our items this way, for example. Just add list items. And let me correct that, app list item or ASP list item. And we get our list items displayed here. But what we want to do is do this by binding to a database. And the way we can do that programmatically, or we can do that with data adapters. So first I'm going to show the programmatic way of doing it. And if I go into the code behind page, we can use a DONet call. So we'll create a SQL connection. And we need to use system data SQL client. And to establish this connection, we need to put in our connection string. So if I go to my server, I'll refresh this just to make sure it's all squared away. And I look at the properties for my server. We actually have the connection string right here under connection string. And I can just copy that. And because we have these slashes, and you can see it doesn't know what it's interpreting all these as escape sequences, we can fix that just by putting an @ so it reads the string literally, and that will connect you to your database. We're going to find a better way of doing that in a bit. The other way the next thing we can do is we need to make a command, and We need to pass in that connection that we created. I'm actually going to refactor out of this lowercase. We'll pass that command into a data adapter, create a data set, and in order to get a data set, we're going to need using system data. By the way, I'm just hitting Control dot in order to get those quick commands. And we'll fill this data set with our data adapter. So what the data adapter fill method does is it basically executes that command, takes the results of that command, that SQL command, and puts them into the data set object, which can be used to store tables. So since this will return one table, we'll get a data set with one table in it. And then what we'll do is we'll take our drop-down list and set its data source equal to that data set. And after we do that, we need to call the DataBind method to actually bind this up. So this is just normal ADO code. We're setting the data source property of the control to a data set, and this is a fairly common way of programmatically binding things. And it's giving me an error. So if you have an SQL error, it may be because you misnamed it. I named it TBL departments, and it should be department. So I'll rename this as department. And then rerun it. And we're getting a data row view. So the reason why we're getting that is we are getting, in fact, a data set. But since we haven't told it what we want to display in this dropdown, it's just binding to basically the toString for this data set object for each row in the data set. And that's a data row view object. So the next thing we need to do is go to our dropdown, and there's a data text field, and you'll notice there's a text field and value field property. So you can bind either of these. It's sometimes useful if you have a table where you have an ID field to set the value field equal to the ID and the text field equal to some useful human readable text. In this case, we're going to set the text field to, and I find it useful to open up your table here on the left. And we're going to, text field, we're going to bind to the name. And the data value field, we are going to bind to the department ID. That way they can pick the name, and what you'll get out of as a value from the drop-down list is an ID field, which is going to be much more useful than the name. We won't have to do as much manipulation to use that index to find things in that table. Having completed that, we'll see how this runs. And we see now we do in fact have a drop-down which we can is displaying the department name. Behind the scenes, it will set the value field to whatever the associated ID is. So let's see if we can display what the index is, and to do that, I'm going to bring in a label. And in the code behind page, we're going to handle an event off this drop-down list. You have several events that you in a drop-down list. We're going to handle the onSelected index changed, and we're going to create a new event. And here I'm going to say set the text property equal to the selected index. So when you change the index, it will set the label to equal to whatever that is, and that should show us the selected index. Let's see what we have. And we can see it's not showing up. And of course the question is, why doesn't that update? Well, the reason is because by default a drop-down list does not have auto postback enabled. If we enable auto postback to true and then run it, whenever we change something, it will cause a postback, which will go back to the server, and we'll run that code. Which will display the change. So, we really needed selected value, not selected index. So when we run this, we get no changes. We'll run it again, and you'll notice that no matter what I put here, this selected index always comes back to be the same thing. So why is that? Well, let's take a look at the page load. Whenever this page loads, and realize that page load is a life cycle event that runs every single time we do a postback. It's going to come back in here and it's going to rebind this this drop-down list, which means that it's going to reset everything in that drop-down list every single time it binds, so we'll never change. A common thing we always have to do with a web form application is handle the isPostback, or take a look at page.isPostback. And what this does is tells us if this is a postback. So the first time the user accesses this page, it's not a postback. That will be false, which means that this will run, because if it's, and you get into some double negatives here. So if not, the page is postback, and we get a negative here, negative of a negative is positive, so it then runs. So the first time this page is accessed, the things inside of this if block will run. And what this will do is bind the drop-down list to that database. Each subsequent postback, it's not going to reattach to the database, which also increases efficiency because we don't really need it to go look at the database each time. Controls in WebForms typically are designed so that they will maintain their state through view state. And so once we bind this drop-down list to this data source, from then on, it will maintain its own state, and we don't need to keep rebinding to the database. Which means that when we do the selected index change, if we change a selected value, this won't knock that out on the subsequent page load. So now when we change our drop-down list, we get the value changed, and it works. And if we look at the page source, we notice that we have this view state object. This is actually maintaining the state of the drop-down list. And so embedded inside of this value in this hidden field, it is information needed to store the items that are in that drop-down. So we can actually, having an access to that selected value, we can do a number of things with this. So perhaps we will change this up a bit. And I'm going to I want to construct this programmatically a little bit more. I'm going to say the text is equal to so if I were to access the we can use selected value or selected item. Under selected item, you have access to the text value, which in our, here we set the text field equal to name and the value field equal to department ID. So we can use that to be able to say that that's the name of the department. And if I run this, Nexus 2, which is sales department, and you can see we're getting access to that to the text field that we referenced in our data adapter. So that completes my demonstration of using a drop-down list in a web form application. Thank you very much.